If you were to pick one that I think is a really great addition to the market, and we had a little bit of it out last year and we're hoping to have more of it this year, it probably would be Armada from Limagrain. It has yield potential. It did 110% of yield in last year's official trials, its first year. That's 10% over the likes of Ambassador, which is a huge step over our already good varieties. It has what they call Scleroflex. So Scleroflex brings increased resistance to the very damaging disease called sclerotinia.
Perhaps without knowing it, tillage farmers are buying the latest technology which is suitable to Irish conditions every year. I'm not talking about the latest iPhone or GPS system, but crop varieties. Many technologies are intrinsically built into the variety. You might know the variety by such names as Graham, Jow, Auckland or Isabel, but traits like BYDV tolerance, resistance to light leaf spot and pod shatter are all part of the package you pay for. You're listening to the latest episode of the Tillage Edge with me, Michael Hennessy. We would really appreciate it if you could listen, follow and give us a review on Apple or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts from. Knowing the strengths and weaknesses of any variety is the first step to growing a high-yielding crop. I caught up with John Dunne, the Trials and Agronomy Manager in Goldcrop, just after the Goldcrop Open Day in the middle of June, to chat about how varieties are performing at the moment and also what new material we can expect in the coming years. I first asked John, is there any exciting material coming through for winter barley?
Well, I suppose I'll just take a step back first. I consider us fortunate and fortunate certainly this year that we have a number of new varieties across a range of crops. Now, it's all fine to be bringing on, we've extra yield and that's great and trying to get market share and all that's fine. But what I'm really happy about is that across all the crops that we'll discuss in a second, there's probably good traits in there that are bringing something that's not just yield. We've TARDIS in the market. It's very well known at this stage. It's over 36% of the market for this autumn. But we've a new winter barley called Integral, which is our first one with BYDV tolerance, and it's bred by Secobra in France. And to be fair to the French breeders, they were probably the first to come at us with genetic tolerance to BYDV. So that's fantastic to have. This year has been another year where BYDV has cropped up in crops. Commonly, infection has occurred after Christmas when the sprays were not put on or they had run out of steam at that stage or there was no opportunity to spray. So having that Integral with that BYDV tolerance is a great trait to have for growers. And again, it has yield, it has superb grain quality, and we have some seed for this autumn and we'll be ramping it up even bigger for next year.
In terms of the Integral with that BYDV resistance, is similar to what the Jow is already on the
Correct,
market or some of the rest of them?
Jow, to be fair, was the first variety to come on the Irish market with BYDV tolerance. Integral is similar in many ways. They actually they both contain a common parent called Amistar, and they were both bred in the same part of France by separate breeders. But Integral would have extra yield potential over Jow, probably in the region of 3 to 4%.
Okay, and would it be a similar kind of regime to Jow in terms of you can sow it early-ish, but you still require a bit of an aphicide nonetheless, or not?
Exactly, yeah. So, it does give you that extra layer of protection from BYDV. These varieties that have this YD2 barley BYDV tolerance in them, they can get infected with BYDV and they can show yellow leaves, but they have a tolerance and don't seem to suffer from the same symptoms, so they don't get the dwarfing and the big impact on yield that you might otherwise get. And I suppose usefully, the Integral seems to have great vigour as well. I would let it stand toe-to-toe with any 6-row conventional or hybrid in terms of its vigour. Very tough.
In terms of 6-row, is 6-row conventional or is it hybrid?
It's conventional.
Conventional,
yeah.
Okay, so there's good flexibility there in it. All right, so anything else in the other winter barleys that you want to mention?
So we are also looking closely at malting winter barley types. Okay, so we have one that's in trial with ourselves called Buccaneer, and Buccaneer was bred by Sayet in Denmark. It seems to be getting a lot of green lights in the UK for use as a malting barley. It's been, I suppose, held back slightly in the Irish market because it suffered from Brexit. It's not as we've had.
That's
to go.
Not a new disease, though, is it?
No, it's not. Well, you could refer to it as a disease, unfortunately. But no, it's coming. But we're slightly held back in terms of seed production until it has completed its EU DUS.
Probably 2 years away.
Correct,
but we might have a better understanding of its malting qualities before
exactly.
We get
and like it has been pilot malted in the UK by a number of end users, and it seems to be getting a green light from them. So that's great to see. And look, if these wet late springs become more common, I think winter malting types are where we want to be looking, and we have a number of breeders who produce varieties with malting quality in them, and we'll certainly be looking closely at them.
Great to have another premium market in that space as well.
Certainly.
Speaking of premium markets, going on to spring barley, what's new in the spring barley?
So we've been blessed as an industry. There's a great flow of spring barley varieties coming through. Planet was a huge step up in its time, and great from a malting point of view. But even since Planet came along, and Planet has peaked at this stage, it's going to be about 10% of the seed now. We already have new varieties coming through like Geraldine, Spinner, Gretchen. We've a new feed one, a very high yielding feed called Hurler, Hurler. Sounds like the ideal variety for Ireland, and we were given the opportunity to name it, and that's the name we gave it. A very high yielding feed variety with superb straw. On the malting front, we have a few in the pipeline that we're looking closely at. Belter is the first one, that's bred by Sacobra in England. That seems to be getting good traction in the UK from a malting point of view. We have one or two more that don't even have names yet. One in particular that I have my eye on, and I've submitted a name lately. If the variety is successful and the name is accepted, I'll tell you about the name and you'll see why I named it.
Very good.
As it has been named.
In terms of those new varieties coming through, are you seeing a slight increase in yield, or is it a combination of yield and kind of the disease traits along the line?
Yeah, fair point, Michael. I suppose when we were talking today, I gave mildew ratings for the spring barleys, but to be honest with you, there's probably no need, because what they call MLO, mildew resistance, has become a standard in spring barley, so they're all effectively resistant to mildew. So the days of scorching spring barley with a morpholine in the month of April thankfully are past. Now, unfortunately, that MLO resistance, while it did bring improved mildew resistance, it did open the door to ramularia and made varieties a little bit more susceptible to ramularia, but that was a trade-off. Yeah, yield-wise, certainly we've seen big increases in yield. The malting varieties, their yield potential has increased as well. And arguably that helps us from a protein point of view, because as your yield, all things being equal, the higher the yield of spring barley you have, the more dilution you will have of protein, so it will lend itself to lower protein levels in the grain. And that's just a lucky coincidence, I guess, of breeding.
But in general, just looking at your list there, the overall disease packages seem pretty good. You know, a lot of them are on 7s and 8s,
thankfully.
pretty much. You know.
Yeah, like even Rhynchosporium, which, you know, back in the days of Punch C and the other fungicides, we were watching Rhynchosporium very closely, but genetically they seem to touch wood. They've really moved the game on, and from a disease point of view, spring barley has become a lot easier to manage. Okay, and
I'm just looking out here on the spring barley in front of us at the moment, and there's very little BYDV down this part of the world in comparison to maybe up with us. Any reason for that? Did you do anything different or special down here?
I gave it one aphicide, Michael, at 3 to 4 leaves, and you know, we know in bright sunny spring weather that aphicide is very short-lived. The UV light breaks it down very quickly. There is BYDV there, and there's plenty of it around the countryside. Some varieties tend to show it a bit more. I'd say the level of new growth in our plots has probably been masking some of it that's there as well. It seemed to be more apparent probably a week ago, so it is here. But as I discussed, its yield effect, I think, is not even worth discussing.
And just in terms of linking it back to the winter barley, BYDV, any kind of that, is that going to be transferred from winter barley into spring barley in terms of BYDV resistance, do you think?
Yeah, so I suppose one of our breeders, certainly Sacobra, are using BYDV tolerance in their spring barley varieties. It's early days, we have tested the varieties, but look, they're not there yet in the other agronomic traits like your standing power and things like that. So it's coming, but it's not going to be tomorrow.
3 or 4 years' time?
I'd say so, at least.
At least, okay. Yeah. Just moving on then, again, we're looking, the next crop just across from us here is spring wheat. You have a couple of kind of main varieties there. There's a new one there?
Nothing jumping out new just yet. We have Fixum and Duncan, which are, you know, they've probably at least heading on for 80% of the market between them. Spring wheat, it's a small crop. It's one that becomes important when you get a wet autumn and you don't get the winter wheat sown. We're looking at new varieties all the time, but again, the pool of breeding is relatively limited compared to winter wheat, for example.
Sure.
So yeah,
they're solid enough varieties.
They are solid, exactly.
For
they certainly are.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Then just beside it there is some spring oats. Isabel is obviously the mainstay there, but you have a new one this year there as well.
We do, and you know, Isabel was, you know, I thought it was a big step when it came along. It brought superb straw strength. The first variety to ever not only match Barra for KPH but surpass it, and was really good in kernel content as well. And I thought to myself, well, we probably won't see one like that for a while. And around the corner comes Enya. And Enya, from the same breeder, Veersum, they're a small breeder in Holland. They brought out Enya, and it's in its third year of autumn sowing trials and its second year of spring sowing trials. And it seems to be up at almost KPH level of Isabel with the straw from Isabel. But interestingly, it seems to do particularly well in the autumn as well, when autumn sown. So Isabel, look, has been a no-brainer when it comes to spring sowing. But in the autumn, it hasn't been the most consistent when autumn sown. But Enya, on the other hand, not only does it do well in the spring, it seems to cruise in the autumn as well. So that's really nice to have. A very big seed size in the Enya as well. It's a much larger grain than the likes of Isabel or Husky. So that should lend itself to a very large flake when you do roll the oats. So if you're a porridge maker or producing rolled oats for animals, it should be a really good thing.
And where's that, do you think, in terms of the milling side of the house? The
Tier Lawn are currently looking at Enya for gluten-free oat production. We're probably not at a level yet where we've been able to give out much for processors like Flahavans. It's you know, we only had one seed crop of it last year. Sure. We've put out a lot more this year, so we'll get there in terms of getting it out to end users. But it looks very promising.
Okay, potential there. And we'll finish up then on all the cereals. So back to maybe winter wheat.
Yeah.
You were showing a couple of promising varieties there. There's I suppose the normal ones that people are very familiar with, Dawson and Graham are there. What are the new ones, or how do they compare to what's already out there? Yeah,
so look, I'm a big fan of winter wheat, Michael. I grow it commercially on our home farm, and it is one that frequently leaves the highest margin, and in wet autumns it's very useful as well. So I'm a big fan of winter wheat, and I'm really anxious to find new varieties for the Irish market. You mentioned Dawson and Graham. They're really good, reliable varieties. Dawson is on the increase, thankfully, and seems to be very good on yellow rust, which is becoming more common around the country. You probably remember a few years ago there was a number of varieties that had a variety called Cougar in their parentage, and Cougar initially had very good septoria resistance, but unfortunately it succumbed and broke down. And a number of new varieties that were coming through trials also were stopped. So that created a speed bump, but we seem to have got over that speed bump, and we're now at the point where we're bringing newer varieties through again. We have a new one called Fitzroy, which should be eligible for the recommended list this autumn 24. Very good septoria resistance, good straw strength on it, and good yield. And coming behind that, we have another one called Hexton, which is a Graham cross, and that is in its second year of official trials, but it looks really promising from a yield point of view and disease point of view and grain quality. And we have one or two more in official trials that have my eye on, and I have high hopes for them as well. So we're doing a lot of work on winter wheat. You saw we're looking at BYDV resistance in winter wheat. Sure. We're doing a lot of work on septoria. I would safely say we've the biggest septoria screening trial in the country, where we're looking at new lines coming from the UK breeders to try and find improved septoria resistance for our market. Because as I said, I think it's an important crop. I think more winter wheat should be grown, but we need to come up with the genetics for the market too.
And certainly the way we think about it, maybe in years to come, BYDV, in terms of what you're after saying there, BYDV might become a thing of the past to a degree in terms of the varietal resistance.
It might go like mildew went in spring barley.
Kind of, yeah. or maybe similarly to oilseed rape, which we'll talk about now, in terms of all of the traits that have been stacked up in them, which is really good. And in oilseed rape, you have a number of different crops out there. You have Auckland and Ambassador, and you have a few others there. What's new there? What's the one that you think is going to be the standout maybe in your mind for next year? If you were to pick one that I think is a really great addition to the market, and we had a little bit of it out last year and we're hoping to have more of it this year, it probably would be Armada from Limagrain. Now we've some really solid varieties out there. You've DK Expose, you've Ambassador, and you've Auckland, and they're all really agronomically solid varieties. Auckland is a fantastic yield potential, a big step up from the Ambassador, which was almost famous as a variety. Auckland is fantastic. They all have turnip yellows virus resistance in them, so turnip yellows virus should be a thing of the past.
we, as a company, Goldcrop, we're very particular about the oilseed rape varieties we'll market. We won't market anything without pod shatter resistance. Believe it or not, there are varieties coming to the market still without that resistance, and we won't even entertain them. Turnip yellow's virus resistance is becoming a standard, just like BYDV resistance. It's a thing that resistance has brought consistency into oilseed rape, in my opinion. The pod shatter is there. You have things like nitrogen use efficiency, which in some of the Limagrain varieties is called N-Flex. That's in Auckland and also in the new one Armada. And I suppose coming back to Armada, I suppose what it has yield potential. It did 110% of yield in last year's official trials, its first year. That's 10% over the likes of Ambassador, which is a huge step over our already good varieties. It has the N-Flex, it has turnip yellow's virus resistance, and it has pod shatter resistance. But what Armada has, and it's the first variety to come from Limagrain with this trait, it has what they call Scleroflex. So Scleroflex brings increased resistance to the very damaging disease called sclerotinia. Now sclerotinia, it's a disease that can occur any year in oilseed rape, and it infects the crop with flowering. It's controlled up till now by chemicals, and Scleroflex, this genetic trait, it's not a replacement for chemistry, but it should complement it and gives an extra layer of protection. So not only would it lessen the severity of infection in Armada, but it also reduces the incidence of sclerotinia in Armada. And if you have less incidence of sclerotinia in a variety or in a crop, it leads to less build-up of sclerotinia in your land. And it's a long-term disease that can build up, and if you're like me who grows oilseed rape commercially, I don't want to build up sclerotinia in my land, and if I have a genetic trait that will reduce that risk, I will embrace it.
Would you still be thinking about where people are coming out of a lot of oilseed rape in their land? They may well have that little bit of a build-up. Put this variety in, are you still being inclined to put one sclerotinia application on?
Yeah,
and that'll help then in the meantime?
Yeah, so they complement each other, Michael.
Okay.
I would certainly stick with the fungicide strategy. None of these things, fungicides or Scleroflex, none of them give complete and utter 0% sclerotinia. But between them, they greatly reduce the risk and the risk of building it up on your land as well.
Okay. John, thanks very much. Just final word maybe on beans. You have a beautiful crop of beans, more so than most people around the country. You managed to get it in early. Not sure how you did it, but you must have got the weather just right at the right time. Looking really well. What's new from your point of view in terms of bean varieties? Yeah,
so thanks, Michael. And we were lucky that part of the field will be the most free draining part of the site. We were a little bit unconventional in terms of how we sowed it. The contractor who plants for us, he's John Flavin is his name, and he's got a strip drill. It's a Sumo DTS drill. Now, typically those drills are used to plant directly into undisturbed land like stubble. But we all know how damp the land was in the spring. So what I did, I ploughed it. I didn't press it, I just ploughed it, which helped the drying of the land. It was in pretty good nick, but to get that extra bit of moisture out of the land, the ploughing was useful. And I got the strip drill directly into the ploughing. So there was no excessive cultivation used, so the land got handled fairly gently. There was no compaction because of the nature of the strip drill. It undoes any compaction behind the wheels, and it worked well. Now that land got a lot of rain afterwards, but the beans are relatively tough and it's free draining, and as I said, we didn't turn the land to porridge. We left it fairly undisturbed. It wasn't rolled, and the herbicide worked well. Look, bean wise, I like beans. I like the beans for what they do to the land as much as the crop themselves. I love what they do to the land. They leave the land in lovely texture. They obviously fix nitrogen, and you have that underlying bit of a guarantee from the government in terms of the protein payment. Sure. But as a break crop, I think they're fantastic, and I've seen no crop that leave the ground in better condition than a crop of beans. So we have Caprice. It's our main variety. Nice bit of earliness in it as a variety, and earliness of ripening is useful, especially for beans. And we also have Proteina coming on. So we're the agents for a very successful bean breeder called PH Petersons. They're German, and they have Proteina coming on. And Proteina got its name because it has about 1% higher protein than the existing varieties. Okay. So that's a real benefit. Yeah.
Okay. Very good, John. Thanks very much for your time and
You're welcome,
and for the day here. And like I say, you're Your site looks good, and it's a credit to you.
Thanks,
for
Michael.
both there.
Thank you.
So that's it for this week. If you enjoyed the podcast, then recommend it to a friend or colleague. And as always, rate, review and follow on Apple or Spotify so you never miss an episode. And for more information, go to teagasc.ie. I'm Michael Hennessy. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back next week with more tillage news and advice.